We're back again on Lutherans Alive with Pastor Blair Morgan, our new director for Evangelical Mission and also working with stewardship. Blair, again, thanks so much for coming in and helping us to get to know you a bit better.
You're welcome. Thanks for giving me a chance to kind of tell this story a little bit. I think it's important.
Yeah, we're glad to do that. And as we said going into the break, maybe a way that would be helpful for people to envision kind of what the resources are available, what one, I guess, example of a process might be, because at this point I'm sure you don't want to be too narrow in terms of your scope or practice, just being opening the doors to possibility. Sure. Now. Let's go ahead and take one example.
What might be helpful is just realizing that we have many congregations across the Synod that are worshiping maybe less than 50 people on a Sunday morning, struggling with the possibilities of either having pastoral leadership that's less than full-time, looking at how they might turn that around and begin to have a ministry where things aren't dwindling, but things are beginning to kind of grow, and that's the challenge. One of the things that I find as we have those conversations sometimes is just a conversation that begins to think in terms of the future, and so I could end up in a congregation. Usually if I would come, I usually talk to if there is a pastor in place, have a conversation with the pastor first so that he or she and I can talk a bit about where things are at, some of that leader's vision for the future and how that might work. But a lot of times then it's a conversation with a church council or a planning group or whatever. And one of the things that's important is having congregations beginning to think about where we can head into the future. And it's not unusual for many of our congregations to be holding tightly to what has been experienced in the past. Days when, as in all of southwestern Pennsylvania, when there were just generally more people in many of these small towns, or more opportunities in different ways, and how in the process of there being less people around, our congregations, many of them have begun to dwindle and get smaller. And sometimes the mission work that we've done in the Lutheran Church over the years has been built much more around just kind of being able to reach out to people who happen to be Lutheran, who move into the area, and there's a Lutheran church, so they come into our doors.
It's a natural affinity.
It's a natural affinity.
Yeah.
The hope that we just kind of have more children, that kind of a thing. Sometimes there can be some denominational combinations that will generate some interest in the Lutheran Church because of some mix that's involved in a husband and wife situation, that if one is Protestant and one is Roman Catholic or whatever, there can sometimes be this sense of where with our liturgical experience that's in worship, but our Protestant theology, sometimes they find a mix that kind of works for them. So, and so we just kind of, in our style sometimes over the years, we kind of wait for those people to walk in the doors. And we need to begin to think about mission in a whole new way, and that would be one of the things we'd want to begin to do, and is helping congregations to begin to think in terms of how can they reach out and make a difference in their communities for the gospel that begins to have an impact on people outside their doors. So they're encountering people who are beyond their congregation for the gospel. Whether they end up back in the doors or not, that's our calling. Now, sometimes it does end up because we've been there and because we've named the name of Christ and because we've been willing to carry that love and grace into the lives of people in one way or another. There is a witness that happens that does then begin to provide a greater visibility for that congregation in their particular area. We have a number of different tools that we can offer. Some very simple, that could be just a one evening sitting down and trying something new to do some brainstorming about mission. An example of that, I'll be able to maybe come into a congregation. It's called asset mapping. And we sit down with a group of people, however many people they can bring together. So it could be 5, it could be 30. I mean, who knows? And we work them into small groups and have them think about what are the assets, the gifts, the experiences that can make a difference for mission in one way or another in their congregation, and just start writing them down on Post-its, large enough so everybody can see them, and begin to just brainstorm about what is it that people have. I mean, and just as a simple example, I mean, one person writes down wagon in a context where that might be something that's available. Somebody else writes down horse. Somebody else writes down hay. Well, as they then in the next try to bring these things together, maybe, if we brought this horse and this wagon and this hay together, maybe we could have a hay ride for our community, and that's of course kind of obvious, but to give you a feel for how that might work. In a whole different context, it could be someone who has gifts in art and someone else who has an ability to connect with an idea of caring about young people, and they would bring those people together and have sort of an art class for young people in some way or another. That may not have been something anybody thought of until you have everybody writing down, well, what are some of the things you can do? And then, so that first step is to get the assets worked out. The second step is to try to get those small groups to connect them. And then the third step, you kind of put them on a wall, and you have people actually physically walk to the ideas they think they'd be willing to participate in. All that can be done in an hour to 2 hours. Now, that's a simple thing. But for some congregations, they just need some new ideas, and that may be a thing to try.
Well, and as you say, that's a very different approach than remembering the past and thinking what we've lost, or the people that used to be there that did this or that or the other thing and they aren't there anymore, to beginning to look at who are we, where are we, what can we pull together. Very, very different approach.
Different approach. And there is a lot of, it can be where you can get caught up in, gee, we used to be able to. Gee, we can't do this anymore. We tried that once. And all those kind of phrases that'll pop up, that some activity like that kind of changes that perspective. That's just one tool, and maybe 7 different ways we could try to provide some ways of encouraging mission.
Yeah. It's a good example, though, and hopefully will spark some ideas for people who might be watching today, or who would be thinking, well, what good could he do me if I contacted Pastor Morgan? It is time to take our second break for today, though. We'll be back and I'll share some other thoughts in just a minute.